What if the colonization of Africa was justified by a church document written nearly 600 years ago? A document that gave European powers the so-called right to invade, enslave, and dominate non-Christian lands, including Africa. This is the untold story of the Doctrine of Discovery, issued in 1452 by the Vatican, a story that shaped the fate of Africa and continues to affect our world today. The birth of the Doctrine of Discovery. In the year 1452, Pope Nicholas V issued a papal bull, an official Vatican decree, called Dum Diversas. This document granted King Afonso V of Portugal permission to attack, conquer, and enslave non-Christian peoples. The exact words of the document authorized the Portuguese to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens and pagans whatsoever, and reduce their persons to perpetual slavery. This was not just a religious statement, it was a legal and moral license for European empires to colonize the rest of the world. How the doctrine targeted Africa. Africa was the first target of this doctrine. With Vatican approval, Portugal began to explore and exploit the West African coast. They established trading posts, kidnapped Africans, and exported them to Europe. This marked the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade, with papal blessing. Soon after, another papal bull called Romanus Pontifex in 1455 gave Portugal exclusive rights over African lands and trade. In 1493, the bull Inter Caetera divided the non-Christian world between Spain and Portugal, as if Africa, Asia, and the Americas were up for grabs. The impact on Africa. The Doctrine of Discovery caused massive damage to Africa. It justified slavery, leading to the capture and forced migration of millions of Africans. It stripped African kingdoms of their sovereignty and labeled them pagan and inferior. It opened the door for centuries of colonial rule, resource extraction, and cultural destruction. It promoted the idea that African civilizations were only valid if they converted to European Christianity. This doctrine dehumanized African peoples and positioned Europe as both morally and spiritually superior, a lie that was used to justify genocide and exploitation. How Europe benefited. Europe's rise to global power was built on the back of the Doctrine of Discovery. It allowed European nations to legally claim vast territories and resources. It fueled the slave trade, which boosted European economies for centuries. It laid the foundation for European empires in Africa, the Americas, and Asia. It created a global system where European identity was linked with civilization, and everyone else was labeled savage or uncivilized. How the Americas benefited. In the Americas, European settlers used the same doctrine to justify taking indigenous land. In fact, the U.S. Supreme Court used the Doctrine of Discovery in 1823 in the case Johnson v. Mintosh. The court ruled that discovery by Christian Europeans gave them the legal right to claim land, even if indigenous people already lived there. This concept of discovery erased the rights of native people and became part of American law. The wealth of the Americas, from plantations to railroads, was built with African slave labor and indigenous lands, all rooted in a doctrine from the 1400s. Long-term consequences. The Doctrine of Discovery created a global racial hierarchy. It told the world that Europe was chosen, and everyone else was disposable. This thinking led to colonization of Africa and Asia, the transatlantic slave trade, the destruction of indigenous cultures, modern systems of white supremacy and systemic racism. Even though the doctrine was religious in origin, it became embedded in law, economics, education, and politics. The Vatican's recent response. In March 2023, the Vatican officially repudiated the Doctrine of Discovery, nearly 570 years later. The Church stated that it was never a true part of Christian faith and acknowledged the pain and suffering it caused. But for many, this apology is not enough. They are calling for reparations, land returns, and full recognition of the harm done. The truth is, Africa was not discovered. It was invaded. The Doctrine of Discovery was not holy. It was a tool of conquest, wrapped in religion. To change the future, we must confront the lies of the past. Like, share, and subscribe if you believe Africa's story deserves to be told, truthfully and powerfully. This is Africa Facts.